My name is Boyd Tuttle, and I am particularly glad for the opportunity to share a little bit about my father and his story. I'm the youngest of 9 children, and my father is someone who's kind of known in the community. His name is Theodore Tuttle, and he was born in 1919 in April. And at the young age of, I believe he was 24, he had signed up to get into officer training in the Marine Corps and ended up training and then being involved in the South Pacific conflict during World War II. He met my mother when he was a student at BYU. He had just graduated and he was about to leave for military service, and he proposed to my mother, and he felt badly to do that because he said, "I don't want to make you a widow." They were married for 10 short days when he shipped off to Fort Pendleton to begin his training, which took quite some time. He ended up in the 5th Marine Division of the Marine Corps and a battalion called the 129th Battalion. To those who are World War II buffs, the 129th Battalion is famous. I mean, they had the task of conquering and surmounting Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima. But the 129th Battalion was given this special task. Unbeknownst to them, they had been training in Hawaii for 6 months, practicing using their amphibious landing crafts, practicing beach landings. So they knew that they were going to be attacking some island, and they were, practicing all the various routines and maneuvers that you do. Anyway, in early February, they headed off from Hawaii and were bound for somewhere in the South Pacific, and that's where they ended up heading to a little pork chop shaped island, as it's been described. I think it's probably less than 2 miles in length and quite narrow. The island was strategic to the United States to be able to take it out because it represented a halfway point between Japan and the United States. For example, when they attacked Pearl Harbor, that was a key place for them militarily speaking. So it was critical that we dominate and take that island. Now, the island was incredibly well fortified. For years, the Japanese had been building a network of tunnels, all concrete, very thick-walled tunnels, and what they call pillboxes. And pillboxes were solid 2-3 foot thick walls inside of hills and mountains, with small portals for guns to poke through and be able to do all kinds of damage to anybody that should ever try to attack the island. So sure enough, when the Americans arrived, there was a destroyer that was in front of the troop ship that literally bombed every square inch of the island. There was no foliage left. There was virtually nothing left standing on the island. They had bombed it completely and entirely, and exactly 0 Japanese of the on the other side were killed. So the bombing had virtually no effect in terms of making any difference in the reducing the enemy's resources or powers. It just put a few pockmarks all over the place. I think there were 24,000 Japanese soldiers on the island defending it, and they had been given instructions to not surrender. And they also didn't have ships to get away in. So the Japanese left their soldiers there to just fight it out. And that ended up being a very sad situation ultimately, but it was very, very devastating to our troops as well. The way that the Marines attacked the island was to approach it in amphibious landing crafts. Well, my dad was in one of those, and they were headed in early in that morning, headed into the beach, and it was eerily quiet. There was no firing, there was no response from the Japanese. For all they knew, the bombardment had take care of it, and they were just going to go in and secure the island. They didn't know really what had happened. Nobody knew after the bombardment. And it wasn't until two or three waves had already hit the beach and landed that the Japanese just came out in full fire from their advantage points high on the mountain, especially on Mount Suribachi, was just completely bristled with pillboxes, shooting down with machine guns, high-powered caliber machine guns that had a long range, very accurate, and they were just literally mowing down the Marines. They had waited until all the Marines, many of them were on the beach, fully exposed, before they opened fire. It was a brutal attack, but it was very strategic and well thought out by the enemy. Now, my dad was in, I believe, the fourth wave. So he left from what's called an LST, which is a landing ship tank. He said that they were going in with the other amphibious crafts on both sides of them, when a 90 millimeter mortar shell, which is a big one, actually exploded right next to his craft. Had it been 10 feet to the right or left, it would have killed everyone on board and blew the track off or disabled the track on that right side. And the other track continued to spin, and it actually provides the forward propulsion for the vehicle. And so it started to spin around in circles. And no matter how they tried to steer it, they couldn't go any further. And they were still 20 yards away from the shore, quite a ways off. All the other crafts were moving on in and driving up on the beach. But his craft, because it couldn't function and it was unable to go further, the commander just dropped the front gate and said, "Hit the beach." And literally, these Marines, you got to hand it to them. I mean, you're floating in water. They had no idea if the water was 2 feet deep or 20 feet deep. And off they went with heavy packs full of ammunition. I mean, it was a suicide mission, because to run off the end of that plank toward the beach, if that water was deeper than your head, it was all over. And yet, obedient soldiers they were, off they ran without hesitation and ran right into the water. And the water came right to their necks. And so they had to hold their guns up over their head and slog through what ended up being this volcanic ash, because it's a volcanic island. The sand on the island is very, very, very unstable and provided almost no traction, no footing at all for them. And so they really struggled to make any forward progress with the waves and with the commotion and everything. What happened then was a lot of destruction. I mean, it was really, really bad. He rarely talked about it. It's something that also you notice with real veterans who witnessed, the very worst of the war. They rarely ever talked about it. My dad was no different in that regard. It actually took my brother, who had a school assignment, to report on some aspect of the war. This was years and years ago, when my dad was still alive. That my dad said, "All right, son," talking to my brother, "sit down, and I'm going to just do this once. So turn on the tape recorder and record this so that you'll hear it, because I'm not going to do this again." He describes the scene, literally using the bodies of fallen soldiers as a barrier against the bullets that were hitting them. Seeing his dear friends that he had made over the last 6 months in training falling and dropping, and seeing the medics trying to carry these wounded and dying soldiers off the beach or to safer locations. His best friend, a guy he called Brownie, was just a few, 100 yards or so ahead of him, and took a mortar, which ended up blowing the leg of Brownie off. And he was there to help tie the tourniquet and work with the medics as they tried to bring him back to safety. And he was, along with Brownie, talking to him and encouraging and telling him he's going to be okay, when Brownie passed away. And so these are some of the things that that he didn't ever want to talk about because it was a very, very difficult experience for him. Now, as it turns out, after several hours, many hours of fighting and battling it out and losing many, and I can't remember the number now, but it was many thousands. I think it was 8,000 Marines who lost their lives on Iwo Jima within the first just few days. This was a very, very bloody battle, and the chances of coming home were actually quite remote for most of these guys, and they knew that going in. But I guess the key point, the key story that really attaches to my dad when it comes to the Iwo Jima battle is what happened on this date that I'm referring to, February 23rd, 1945. It's a famous date in the history of the South Pacific theater, because that's the day that the famous flag that we've all seen, a monument done and pictures of, was raised. That flag on the top of Mount Suribachi, where you have the 6 Marines that are pushing it up. Joe Rosenthal, the photographer, snapped that photograph. That became, world famous, of course, and that ended up being a very important turning point for the war. That photograph actually is something of a miracle we can talk about. But my dad's role in that is quite interesting. So as they were there at that point, now they had finally secured the mountain. They had knocked out, thanks to the brave sacrifice of many of his comrades who literally ran right into machine gun fire with grenades and threw them accurately into those little tiny portals, the little teeny openings, to get a grenade to blow up inside the pillbox. It was the only way to take out those guns. And these guys, many of them sacrificed their lives in attempting to do that. A few of them were successful, and it was quite amazing that they were able to do that. After the mountain had been secured, and they were then the commander, whose name was Johnson, Chandler Johnson, asked Lieutenant Schreier to carry up a flag to the top of the hill. And my dad and many of us were all down at the base of the hill, and they watched as these few guys, these reconnaissance guys, worked their way up the hill, even though there was still active fire, coming from various places along the way. They got it up to the top of the hill and they raised the flag. Now, when the flag went up, there were 3 hurrahs, and they all shouted, hooray, hooray, hooray. And at that point, Chandler Johnson, the commander, turned to Ted Tuttle and said, go down to one of the ships on the beach and get a large battle flag, large enough so that the men on the other end of the island can see it. It will lift their spirits also. So, obedient to the command, Ted Tuttle walked down to the beach and went aboard an LST 779. And this is now his words. I asked the on-duty officer there for a large battle flag. He was surprised by such a request and asked why I wanted it. And I told him if he wanted to see his flag up on the top of Mount Suribachi, he should go and get one for me. Shortly, he returned with a large battle flag. Now, I will insert this because it's not in his write-up here. That battle flag, turns out, was purchased by one of the ensigns, a Navy officer, at Pearl Harbor. And then he had stored it in his footlocker. And that's the one that they ended up pulling out and giving it to my dad. I returned to the command post with the flag, and I asked Colonel Johnson if I should take the flag to Lieutenant Schreier, who was on top of the hill. He said yes. And so after going only a few yards up the hill, he called me back. Quote, we have just received word from Lieutenant Schreier to send up some batteries for their SCR 300 radio from Company E. Private First Class Rene Gagnon was headed up the hill with the batteries. And so the colonel suggested that Gagnon carry the flag, whereupon I gave the flag to Gagnon. He carried it up the hill and helped raise it up, as he has said. And Gagnon, of course, Rene Gagnon, is one of the 6 men in that famous photograph. So that is, my dad has often said that was my brush with infamy or famousness that never came his way, which he was actually grateful for, because those that were in the photograph, their lives were forever changed because of that event. And it's quite amazing. A lot of people don't know the story about that photograph, and there's some really cool things I'd like to share with you. So as the men got up there, they didn't have a flagpole, and so they found some rebar and some piping and things that had come out of these pillboxes that had been bombed. And they actually were able to break one loose, a big long pipe, and they tied the flag to the top of the pipe, and then they were pushing that pipe up. Now the photographer was an AP photographer by the name of Joe Rosenthal, happened to be up there because he knew that the first flag had actually been up there, but that first flag was really a small one. And Chandler Johnson, the commanding officer, actually wanted that little flag. That was another reason that he wanted my dad to go get the big flag, because he wanted that little flag for his own personal archives. And they so when they pushed the flag up there, Joe Rosenthal, knowing that there was going to be a new flag raising, headed up there, and it just arrived at the top. Of course, Mount Suribachi is a volcano, so it has a crater, and he had just arrived at the crater and was starting to go down into the crater where they were on the other side raising the flag. And he didn't have time to get set up or position himself. He just saw that he was quite late getting there. They were starting to push the flag up. And so he just literally from the hip, without even looking through the viewfinder, he snapped several pictures, boom, boom, boom. And that ended up, and then after that, he went over to the guys and said, hey, okay, I've got some pictures. And they posed for a few pictures, and with their guns and the flag and so forth in the background, and he took several more pictures. Now, there happened to be another photographer, a video, a film photographer, at the same time taking the same shot of what happened. So we have two witnesses, if you will, two eyewitnesses of that singular event taking place. So what happened is Rosenthal brought back his camera, turned in his film to the guys on board the ship, the AP correspondents on the ship, and their technology was pretty good, because they literally radioed that photograph to New York, and it came out in the New York Times the very next day, maybe 1 day, 2 days later, that the picture came out, and it was a total game changer, because that picture at this bleak time of the war, where the Marines had been suffering battle after battle, loss after loss, and not having any headway or gains, this picture of their triumph at Iwo Jima was a huge, huge thing. It just sent a shockwave of joy and hope through America. And many people have said, and I believe it, that was a divine intervention, that picture got taken the way that it did, and that it created such a change of heart and a hope throughout the American public, could have probably come in no other way. So that's Dad's brush with destiny. He did come back after the war and went on to get his master's in education instruction, became a teacher at Brigham Young University for a time, and went on to become a general authority of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and served in that capacity as a member of the 70 for about 28 years, and then passed away at the age of 67 when I was 25 years old. I would say that if you have people that you know, and veterans who are living or passed on, they well may have unclaimed assets out there that they would certainly want their posterity to have, and to not just have it go unclaimed and unused.